the end of your supplementary.
Yeah. Yeah, item 32. So, yeah, item 32, Crown Council Transition Work Programme. It's on page 235, which is in the supplementary agenda. Since which time we have made some significant amendments to the recommendation. If you could take out the word staff, it's a recommendation that we're putting to the council. All right, so the reason for the paper is really to acknowledge that there is an incredible amount of work to do in a relatively short space of time. And I wonder if I could get you, Brendan, to perhaps just give a quick overview of the work programme that needs to be undertaken in the next, I think, 8 weeks probably, and then a further tranche of work once the government introduces legislation for the transition.
Sure. So in early July, the government released both a cabinet paper and also the draft transition recovery plan. And what the cabinet paper minute referred to, which is available on the CERA website, was a commitment from the Crown to work with the Christchurch City Council, both via the respective chief executives and the mayor and minister, on a range of matters, including most significantly the form and function of the entities that will be leading the regeneration and recovery of Christchurch, both Central Christchurch and also the impact on Development Christchurch Limited, and also the council's working collaboratively with the council on the input into the proposed future statute that will replace the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Act, which expires in April next year. The timeframes on the draft recovery plan, a submission by the end of July, and there's a number of report backs to Cabinet. Some of the report backs are also at the end of July. The report back that were explicitly referenced to working collaboratively together is a report back to Cabinet at the end of August. So those timeframes mean that over the next month, 6 weeks, there'll be a fairly intensive period of working both with officials at CERA, but also more broadly Crown officials on both our submission on the draft transition recovery plan, but also on the nature of the ministers' advice back to Cabinet for Cabinet decision making. So on that latter piece, I do stress that it's the Minister's report to Cabinet. The Council doesn't have a direct line into Cabinet, but this is a great opportunity for us to work positively together with the Crown to arrive at the outcomes that are best for Christchurch. That isn't the last opportunity. There's a continuing series of Cabinet report backs, including on future tranches of working out the detail of the legislation in the current timeframe outlined in the Cabinet minute. We'll see the legislation introduced around September, and will then go through a select committee process. So those are again processes that we'd have a keen interest in and may well submit in further detail on those matters over the coming months.
That's great. Are there any questions? Yanni?
Thank you, and thank you for the amendments you've put forward. Just in terms of what the outcomes that are best for Christchurch, I'm just interested in how the community have input into what they are, and whether there's any process for us to discuss with our community what outcomes they think are best for Christchurch as part of this process.
Well, there is a very public process happening right now, which is called the Draft Transition Recovery Plan. And the Draft Transition Recovery Plan contains the proposal for an entity like Regenerate Christchurch, and indicates a number of questions that the people of Christchurch and actually others, they're not limiting it to the people of Christchurch, are asked to respond to. And of course it is the greater Christchurch area that's covered by it, but even beyond that, anyone in New Zealand can submit on it. I've been thinking exactly about your question, Yanni, because I think it is important for us to indicate to our own constituencies how important it is to make a submission. And the reason why it's important, because people need to know that a submission's going to make a difference, because people are sick of making submissions, they're sick of they've lost energy, and so they need to know that it's going to make a difference. I guess that the one thing that I would say is that by making a submission, you're actually telling the government that you want to be engaged in a process of, being involved in the recovery of the city, that you want to be involved in the decision making. We've talked as a council about, moving to a much more sort of collaborative and devolved decision-making framework as we push decisions away from the council table and out into our community boards and more broadly into the community. And, I've been reflecting over the last few days about the enormous number of submissions that came in on the LTP, where people didn't come and ask the council to do anything for them. They came and asked the council if we would work with them and let them do things for themselves with support from the council. So that sort of engaged process, I think, the government needs to hear that directly as well. And we've heard that message, and I think that allowing this process to hear that message as well. But one word that I'd just simply say, and I've watched the online commentary on this, there isn't a view that what the Crown does now should be handed over to the council, lock, stock and barrel. That does not exist. And to be frank, I don't think that we're ready for that either. It is going to be an iterative process as the Crown gradually moves away from the control of the CBD and potentially the residential red zone, as the council's able to step up. But not the council as an organisation, the council on behalf of the people of Christchurch who want to engage in that process. So, I think this is a wonderful opportunity. The Crown did not have to do a recovery program, a recovery plan. They didn't have to do one. They could have gone straight to statute. And I think that the government, by actually coming out and putting a recovery plan out for people to comment on, has actually indicated that it wants to deal with the people of Christchurch in a completely different way. And I think that's good news for the city. And I think if the people respond to it in the way that the government's held out their hand and said, look, we don't have to do a transition recovery plan, we're going to do one, and we invite you to have a say, I think that's tremendous. So what we will do is we will sign off on a principles one, because we have to do it the week before, because the last week of July, unfortunately, sort of bad coincidence there, but that's a recess week for the council, so we're not here that following week to make decisions on the submission. So we'll make those on the 23rd or the 24th, depending on how things pan out. And but I think that after that, we should definitely be engaging with our communities about all of the issues, because there is another stage, and that is the legislation that will come in. And I'm sure there will be great interest in that select committee hearing, and I'm sure the select committee will come to Christchurch. So engaging with our communities about what they want to achieve, I think that's absolutely core critical to the success of the program.
What I was trying to understand, this is really focused on the structures that come in, but there's nothing that captures what the vision is for the city, whether it's the blueprint, whether it's share an idea, whether it's any other kind of new thinking that's emerged or evolved since time has passed. So
that's not going to be decided between now and the end of July.
right, so setting up a structure to deliver on outcomes that's best for Christchurch without knowing what those outcomes are seems a very hard task.
As I just said, it's an iterative process. We've got up to the end of July for the submitting on the plan. As Brendan has said, we're able to work collaboratively with central government over what goes into the cabinet paper that's signed off at the end of August. Legislation comes in September. We will obviously be making a submission to the Select Committee, and we will want our communities to engage in that process as well. I'm sure that the vision for what the people of Christchurch want for their city, and the fact that they want their city engaged not just as a CBD, not just as a residential red zone, but actually more broadly, the whole of the city. Damaged suburbs like Richmond, like New Brighton, Sumner, Littleton, all of these communities need to be seen in that concept of
And
regeneration.
That's why I was really interested to understand, because if you don't know where you're going, how do you know what's the best vehicle to get there? If you're going up to the mountains with snow, you might take a four-wheel drive. If you're going down south to Ashburton, you might take a sports car because you're going on a long, flat, straight road. So
You wouldn't speed though.
you wouldn't speed, but it's just, I guess what I'm hearing you saying is we should be encouraging people to make submissions to this process around what outcomes they want for the city, even though this is mainly focused on the vehicle, because that's the first opportunity.
We already know what our community wants. Share an Idea actually gave us a framework for thinking about, not even though it was focused on the CBD, it really did speak to what people wanted for Christchurch. And that still remains the most incredible outpouring of contribution that has existed in the whole earthquake story. And I think that we can easily formulate that vision for our submission on the plan.
Let's just check that these processes and principles that we're agreeing to today are flexible enough to be able to be changed, amended, considered in light of whatever work gets done around what that final destination is that we agree with the Crown. Because I think we're still a long way from
we are going to
go.
sign off on really the high level principles, and yes, I imagine that we will, in our submission, reflect what the people of Christchurch told the previous council and Share an Idea. Paul.
I want to move or second it, and then talk to it.
Well, I'll move it and you can second it and you can speak to it. Oh, sorry.
That's all right, I'm way down. Just on 1.4, the generation of the city, the geographic scope. Sorry, geographic scope yet to be determined. Can you talk us through that? So when and how and on this, or
Look, maybe I can talk to this because...
Well, you touched on it just before.
The thing was that if you actually look at the recovery plan, the draft, and I haven't got it in front of me, but the headline on the relevant section that deals with Regenerate Christchurch talks about the central city. So it is clear when the original cabinet paper was drafted that this Regenerate Christchurch was to focus in the same area, the same space as the CCDU. So not Sarah, but the CCDU. After some discussions around why it might be a better idea to look more broadly than that and talking about those different communities that are so incredibly damaged out there and how we might resolve that. That led to a discussion about whether we should be talking about what is the best geographic scope for Regenerate Christchurch. So it's been put in there as a matter to be discussed rather than something that's predetermined. Any other questions?
Could I just add, Madam Chair, that you raised the point early on about the direction and destination. The Crown have also flagged that as part of the legislative review, so the Statute and Select Committee process, that they would be reviewing the early sections of the recovery strategy, and part of that work would include redeveloping the purpose statement from the recovery strategy, which is the, to continue the analogy, the kind of vehicle in a sense for defining the future destination. So that'll be a piece of work that will operate in parallel with the legislation progressing through the Select Committee process, which of course will be an open public process through to a parliamentary process.
Oh, so they'll put out the recovery strategy for amendment?
I think what the intention is that the recovery strategy, as it's currently known, will morph into, I suspect, something called a regeneration strategy to maintain the synergies and the terminology. But obviously the purpose statement of the recovery strategy would need to be aligned with the purpose statement of the corresponding legislation. So then the actions under the legislation need to be consistent with the purpose of the legislation and purpose of the recovery strategy.
Well, that's very helpful, because I have a particular issue with the recovery strategy, which is that the whole community engagement section of it sits outside the enforceable statutory framework. So that could be something we could fix during that process. Jimmy?
One question. If later on the Crown establish this regenerate Christchurch, and also currently Council has been established development Christchurch limited. This tool is all focused on the regeneration of the city, etc. I just want to know what's the relationship between these two, the kind of authority or company, etc. In case if they integrate together, whether have more or less the overlap, how to mitigate this the situation. This is my particular concern.
Yeah, no. Do you want to comment on
So
that, Brendan?
I suppose I think we'd traverse the geographical location potentially of Regenerate Christchurch. Development Christchurch Limited has a far broader geographical scope though than just the central city, so that's the matter, one of the matters for consideration over the kind of coming period is how we marry up the entities and how we marry up the geographical focus of the entities, and that'll be a matter between the Crown and the Council ultimately to have a position, ideally an agreed position, but the Crown will ultimately make a decision through Cabinet of the focus for their particular entity.
The Cabinet Minute specifically asks for a consideration of the relationship with Development Christchurch Limited, and to talk about, and it talks about possible integration with. So all of the options are on the table. Yep. All right. No more questions? I'll put the motion. Yanni? Yep.
Cool. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate the amendments that have been made, particularly for paragraph B, where we've now included the words environmental sustainability, community health and wellbeing in a seamless transition back to local leadership. And I hope within that broad context of leadership, we also mean local decision making and local governance, because I think local leadership is quite broad. Actually, there's also some key elements in there that we should be encouraging back, as we have with the request for an elected ECAN. So I applaud us for making those amendments. I just wanted to say that I think the really positive thing about this is the fact that this recognises that the reports will come back to Council for strategic direction and major policy issues. So unlike the binding cost share that Council didn't have come back in its final form, it's my expectation through this process we do actually get to see what the details are of whatever's discussed and negotiated with the Crown for our formal approval. So I think that's a really important point, because we don't want to end up in a kind of a Greek recipe for austerity that people don't feel that they've had an involvement in. And I think this transparency of us making a collective decision on the implications of it are really important. I just also wanted to make the final point is that I do think I welcome the opportunity for us to discuss a new vision or new outcomes for the city. What we know post-earthquake is that things, post-disasters, are that things are dynamic, things change. So a blueprint that's stuck in a certain period of time, or a sharing an idea that's stuck in a certain point of time, has to evolve as we recover and we rebuild and we regenerate. So I welcome the opportunity. I appreciate it's not part of this structure, but I do welcome the opportunity to have that flexibility, because at the end of the day, we've heard that this is a matter between the council and the Crown. I actually think it's a matter between the CCC, which is the council, the Crown, and the citizens of the city, and they have a right to be involved and informed and actively participate in the decisions for the future of the place that they call Christchurch. So with that being said, I'm happy to support the recommendation.
Thank you. Andrew.
Thank you. I'll quote from the Mayor just a few moments ago, in fact, who said it's tremendous that the government want people to have their say. My view is that it'll be even more tremendous when the people of Christchurch are fully engaged with this process, when the government has listened to what the council and the people of Christchurch have had to say about this, and when that information that's been provided, the insight and the vision of the people of Christchurch has influenced not only the process, but also its outcomes. And this is an opportunity for council to lead by example by following a robust process in terms of its own submission to make sure we get that absolutely right and say what needs to be said, and working to the best outcomes for Christchurch that are presented by this opportunity. The other thing I would say is that this needs to be about the whole city. It needs to be inclusive, so not just about the central city, but about all of those suburbs that have been mentioned and a number that haven't as well. I welcome the amendments which have been made to the report that's in front of us, or the resolutions in front of us today, and that's actually been part of some very positive and iterative conversations which have happened already today, and that, in my view, augurs well for the conversations that we'll continue to have as the process evolves. And the report that's in front of us is, in fact, about a process, and about a process that needs to be inclusive, flexible, nimble, reactive, open and clear, and which allows us to get a result in terms of first the submission and the wider piece of work that can respond to and be inclusive of the views of all of the councillors around this table, and all of the councillors as representatives of the communities out there. And, you know, we're certainly in touch with the community board chairs, the community board members, community members. We have a fair idea. We've just come through a long-term plan process. We're very aware of what the issues out there that the people are concerned about are. So all of that will feed in through this process. And on the basis that it is nimble, reactive, flexible, open, clear, transparent, inclusive, all of those other things that have been talked about today, and that it produces results that maximise the opportunity, I certainly support the process that's put out here today.
Paul.
Yeah, look, I'm really happy to support the submission on this transitional process. I also think that it actually highlights a shift in the government's thinking towards Christchurch and its transition and how it's best to go forward. And it is a shift in their approach, which I'm really happy to see. It actually offers us an opportunity as a council who represent the people of Christchurch to actually give the input that Yani's talking about and have that influence on how our city evolves. And I'm a big supporter, as people know, of the central city, but I'm also cognizant of the connections that come into the central city. And a central city is only as strong as its suburbs that surround it. And of course, if we strengthen those connections and make those suburbs successes in their own right, we will actually strengthen the city centre at the same time. So I think I agree that the approach needs to be slightly wider than the central city out to our suburban areas, because that's where our growth is happening. And I just say that, I'm really looking forward to this new collaborative approach with the government and the shift and balance of control over the city that will happen over the next 5 years. And I think it also highlights the government's changing in position, is highlighting actually that we've actually really come a long way as a council over the last year and a half, 2 years, and they've recognised that and they've given us this opportunity, which, as you rightly pointed out, Mayor, that they didn't have to do. And so I'm really getting on with the job of rebuilding our city.
Thank you. Just the last thing that I wanted to say was, and I found a website that just summarised it really well for me, which were the 6 C's of successful community engagement, because I think this is what councils do stand for. So there is no point thinking of ourselves as a council. We are representing the city in this regard. So what we are doing is on behalf of and with the members of our communities. Here are the 6 C's of successful community engagement, and I think we have to commit to ticking the box on all of these as we go through this process. Capability. The members are capable of dialogue. That means talking to each other, but it means listening to each other as well. That's what dialogue is. If you don't have genuine dialogue, that's monologue. And, you're getting a monologue from me right now. But dialogue is core critical. You've got to be capable of dialogue. So capability. Commitment. Mutual benefit beyond self-interest. The public interest has got to be protected in all of these discussions going forward, because you think of the possibilities. I know that the government's been very focused on the anchor projects, but for me it's the spaces in between. They're the ones that can be activated by a view of the public realm, but also a view of what the private sector can bring to the vibrancy of our city. That's going to be occurring in those spaces. The whole purpose of the anchor projects, regardless of what people think of them, the whole purpose of them was to provide that activation and that commitment to Christchurch. Contribution. Members volunteer, and there is an environment that encourages members to have a go or take responsibility or risks. And that sense of the possibility, I've heard the Deputy Mayor use this expression, this is a city right now where anything is possible. Members volunteer, their contribution is valued because they are prepared to have a go. They're prepared to take responsibility. They're prepared to take risks. We need to as a city. Continuity. Members share or rotate roles, and as members move on, there is a transition process that sustains and maintains the community corporate memory. So important. How often do communities stand or fall on one person? That one person falls over or moves somewhere else, and the whole structure underneath just whittles away. And finding ways of keeping communities fully engaged is really, really important. Collaboration, reliable interdependence, a clear vision with members operating in an environment of sharing and trust. If there is one word that goes with leadership, it is trust. Have to be trusted to be able to be leading. And actually leading does mean collaborating, because leading actually means looking for the leadership capabilities in others. The best leaders in our history are those that where people can say, I did that myself, because they're not seeing the leader taking the ownership. They're actually allowing others to own the results. And the last one, which I think is incredibly important, and that's conscience. Embody or invoke guiding principles, ethics of service, trust and respect that are expressed in the actions of the community. And that's why every single one of us is sitting around this table. We're here to honour that trust and earn that respect and continue to ensure that the expressions of the actions of our communities are able to come to the fore. So that's my monologue, and I would now like to put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you very much. Now, the next item